If you have ever tried to hold a budget and tried to be really good at your budget, but haven't really been able to be consistent with it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that thumbs up so that I know you're here and you'll stay updated with more Money Like Honey videos. From a lot of videos that I've seen out there, everything is all about like budgeting, like
have a really solid, strict budget and just be structured and everything.
I'm gonna be totally honest, like I've tried to have a strict budget. I've tried the apps, I've tried You Need a Budget and whatever all the other apps where you're tracking your expenses and you're doing all these things. And if I'm totally honest, I just haven't been able to be consistent with it for longer than like a week. It always took up so much time out of my schedule, and I didn't think like I was getting enough of a reward to actually keep going. Now, for the entirety of my life, I didn't really have a lot of structures when it comes to finances, but I have always kind of just figured it out, I guess. And the kind of more minimalist approach, if you will, to personal finance that I've been taking is just, make sure that you're making more money than you're spending. And as you're making more and more and more, make sure that your expenses are not increasing more and more and more at a significant rate or at a similar rate. Because at that point, you're always going to be living paycheck to paycheck. This is actually Parkinson's law, where the more money you make, the more expenses you have, and you always feel like you're struggling. And that is something that I always wanted to make sure I don't have to face or struggle with. Now, it doesn't mean that I never struggle with money. I definitely had to go through a lot of my own personal mindset shifts when it comes to finances and making money and things like that. But I actually never really tracked my expenses in any like specific, logical, intense way or anything like that. However, I always was very clear about what I was able to afford and what were the things that I really wanted to afford and feel confident in investing or spending on that I knew made me happy. So I think what happens for a lot of people is as they're making more money, again, they're just kind of like, okay, well, what do I do with all this money? Especially if you haven't ever experienced having more income, whether your parents maybe weren't wealthy or maybe you grew up kind of, middle class or lower income class, which I think we were kind of lower middle income, I would say. And I grew up in Poland, so it's a little different. It's a very small town. My parents were both working pretty much all the time. And I was constantly, told that we can't afford something or, Camila, you can't get new clothes because you have to wear hand-me-downs. So I was very much faced with that type of messaging for a long time. And what I knew is that I wanted to make sure that I never had to feel like money was going to be a challenge or like I had to cut different things out of my life that made me potentially happy. Right? There was something that made me really, really happy and actually made my life worth living. I didn't want to cut those expenses out. I wanted to organize my budget, if you will, the invisible budget, so that I was able to still have the money to spend on things that mattered. So for me specifically, because I work from home, I have my own business, where I live is the most important thing for me. Honestly, I don't care very much about cars. I don't care about clothes. I don't care about really that many things. I am pretty minimalist when it comes to expenses, if I'm being totally honest. The biggest things I spend money on are my apartment and business related things that are actually going to drive an ROI. And everything else I think is just kind of a luxury that, I don't know, like I could go without it, to be honest. Do I still spend money on it? Yeah, I'll splurge once in a while, but it's not something that I necessarily spent a lot of time thinking about. And for me, I've recognized that the most important thing for me is where I live. What's the location? What does the environment look like? Because that is what is going to be directly correlated with me being at my top level, living up to my potential, and actually earning more money in my business. Now, if you don't have a business, obviously you might be kind of struggling to connect the dots for yourself. Like if you're working at a job, what does it matter? But that's the thing for you to think about, right? Because if you're never at home, and yet you are paying tons of money for a beautiful apartment that you are never in, does that really make sense? Right? Is that something that you really need to be doing? Or what can be the thing that actually allows you to step up and feel like you're at the top of your, potential potentially, or reaching towards that potential? So for me, I knew it's always the apartment. I knew that was the number one expense I always had, and I was willing to pay, still within my means, of course, and in a way that was still fairly comfortable, maybe a little bit stretchy, but I knew that it would make me step up and basically pick up the slack so I could actually do the things I needed to be able to afford even more things. Now for me, this also looked like I didn't have a car. And I lived in Chicago and New York and even in San Diego downtown, and I just Ubered everywhere, and I actually calculated it, and it was much cheaper for me to Uber and Lyft than to have a car and have all the car payments, pay for parking, all that stuff, gas. And because of that, I didn't have a car until recently, actually, until last November, Black Friday, is when I got my first car, basically. So that was the first like big expense. And even then, like, I wasn't looking for the fanciest car. I wanted a car that I felt good in. If I'm gonna drive something, I wanna feel good in it, but it had to feel like it was a comfortable monthly payment that it wouldn't make me feel like there's something missing, or it wouldn't make me feel stressed, or it wouldn't make me feel any of those things. So there's no way I was gonna pay like $1,000 a month for a car. I don't even drive that much. Why would I pay that much, right? So I needed to find the number that actually made sense for me and would make me feel good. And then everything else is honestly just kind of not that important. Obviously, food is important, but that's kind of it. Now, the thing that I do actually track very often, and even if you don't have a business, I think there's a way for you to integrate this into your life, is the only thing I track. I don't track my expenses. I will look at my credit card statements to, make sure there's nothing there. And I don't really do it too much in terms of, how much am I spending in each category? I don't really get into all of that. I really look at how much did I spend total during that statement period. And then is there anything off? Because, you never know. Sometimes people steal credit cards and then, there's hackers or whatever. And I want to make sure there's nothing off, right? Was I charging correctly? I just take a look at that a little bit, and everything else I'm just aware of, I'm conscious of, and I try to minimize anything that I don't use. If there's any subscriptions I sign up for, I make sure that I cancel them. If I don't use them, I actually take a pretty good look at all the subscriptions I have to make sure that I'm not paying for things that I'm not using. So every single purchase I make is conscious, it is intentional, and I ask myself if it's something that I actually really want. Is it something that is a need for me or a true want for me? Or is it just something that, I'm doing mindlessly? You want to make sure you're not spending mindlessly, because that's how you can start digging yourself into a hole that's kind of hard to come out of. And if you're using your credit cards, which I do, I make pretty much every single purchase on my credit card. I make sure that I'm able to pay for that if I needed to immediately. I don't put anything on credit that I don't have the ability to pay off right away. And that's what I do with every single purchase, for business or personal. Now, I did mention that there is one thing that I track all the time, and I've been tracking it for years, and that is how much money I'm bringing in every single day. So for me as a business owner, I think this is pretty straightforward and easy to do, because I do have sales that come in either every day or almost every day. So anytime I have a transaction that is happening, I get an email from Stripe or from PayPal or whatever it is however it is that I made that money, and I put it into a spreadsheet that says today's date, how much money came in, and for what. And then I have this running basically spreadsheet where I enter in every single number, every single amount of money that comes in. And this allows me to actually take a pause, celebrate, and be grateful for every single transaction that occurs, every single sale, every single recurring payment that comes into my bank account. And that is something I'm able to celebrate and therefore call more in. What you focus on grows. So instead of focusing on my expenses and the things that I'm losing and the things that I'm, releasing or what I don't have, instead of spending time on what I don't have, I spend time and energy and focus on the things that I do have and the things that are coming in, so that more of that can come in. And I get to give myself a little pat on the back and then ask myself, how can I keep repeating this? How can I do more, right? So I have a spreadsheet I do every single moment, every single sale that comes in. Sometimes I do it multiple times a day, right? And I just keep entering in. I had a client that asked me if she can just have a bookkeeper do this. And yeah, you can do this. Obviously, this is not for bookkeeping purposes. This is for your mental energy, conscious attention. That's the purpose of you doing your own tracking in a spreadsheet. You can do it on your notebook too if you want to, but the purpose of this is not for bookkeeping. You obviously want to be taking care of that too. But the purpose of this exercise, this money tracking habit, is to celebrate and be grateful for every single dollar that comes into your life. Now, if you are not a business owner and you don't have sales coming in, you can obviously start tracking your paychecks. That's an obvious one. And you can also start tracking everything that comes into your life that is of a certain value. So a fun example is if I go to Panera Bread and I get my stuff and I'm like, can I get an extra baguette? And they're like, sure, I guess. You were supposed to pay for that. They give it to me for free. That is something I could mark as value added. How much would I have to have paid for this baguette? One time I got free fries at Shake Shack. I went, I got food, and I was like, hey, he's like, are these your fries? I'm like, no, but they could be if you give it to me, and he did. And it's just, it's just fun, like chatting. It's nothing crazy. I'm not like, it's just like, haha, I'm just asking, right? And I don't even do it seriously. I'm just playful, and sometimes it turns out that I just get some free stuff. And that you can allocate a value to this. So you can start identifying and celebrating every single piece of abundance that comes into your life. And I've found that that is so much more valuable to focus on than the things that are leaving your life, the things that you're spending money on. And then you start getting kind of into that habit of seeing what's not working and, oh my gosh, I'm spending so much money, and oh my gosh, I have this bill to pay. And you start to feel kind of either depressed or stressed out. And I don't want to invite that feeling into my life. So I'm going to focus on what actually makes me happy and lights me up and makes me feel good inside, so I can attract more of that. Now, another thing I do, and this is very business oriented, so if you don't have a business, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to do, but I do also project my income for months in advance. So I actually have a spreadsheet where I can see how much money is going to be coming into my account, into my business, based on the recurring payments that I have for my clients. Now, if you don't have this going on, you can start to project like, hey, is there something I could do this month that could potentially bring me some extra cash? Are you a freelancer of some kind, or can you take up a side hustle that can bring you some extra cash? If you want to purchase something, right, that's a bigger expense, maybe you want to buy the new iMac, or you want to go on vacation and you want to bring in an extra few $1,000s, you can start to break down, what do I need to do in order to make that happen? You're not getting into the energy of like,
oh, this is never going to happen for me, oh my gosh, I don't get paid enough, I have to spend all this money on these expenses.
And you start spiraling out of control with these doubts and fears and concerns. And instead, what you want to ask is, you want to be solution oriented. How can I make this work? How can I start bringing in the money? What can I do to bring this money in? Because there's something that you can do. No matter if you have a business or not, no matter if you have a freelance hustle or not yet, there's always something you can do to bring more money in. You just have to be willing to do it. You just have to ask yourself. You already know what the options. There's so many resources out there that allow you to potentially bring some extra money in, but you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to get curious about what you can do, so you can actually make that possible for you. So that anytime there's something coming up, it's like, what can I do to pay that off? What can I do to bring that money in so I can pay for that? If I want something and I don't have the money, what can I do to have the money? We are such powerful beings, and we always have the ability to create whatever it is that we want. And it gets to feel good when you start stepping into this energy of, abundance is all around you, opportunities are all around you. It is actually really hard to not call them in, to not be actually faced with money everywhere, really, feeling money like honey, right? Having it be all around you. And I see this all the time for myself. I see it for my business coaching clients. I see it all around. And I know that you're capable of the same. The biggest hurdle for you is going to be, how can you start thinking differently, right? Because if you've been in the same situation for years, it's hard to start thinking in a different way. It's gonna kind of start to feel like BS in the beginning. It's gonna feel like there's no way this is real. There's no way this can feel like that. There's no way I could potentially find money or attract money without having to do anything. It feels like BS because you haven't done it before. And you might even start to call BS on other people who have done it because you haven't been able to see that that is a real possibility. You might call them a scam when they're not. So the way you think and the way you speak is honestly the reality that you're going to see on your life. I focus on what I want to grow, not on what I want to minimize, right? I have conscious awareness of what is going on, so I can feel like I'm responsible, and I can feel like I have control over my finances, and I take the steps necessary to invest in all these different pieces. But at the same time, I focus most of my energy on growth. How can you start thinking about your own growth? What can you do? What do you need to ask yourself right now to feel more of that growth in your own life? So anyway, hopefully this is kind of helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, thank you for being here.